respected Chief Guest, Dean, International and Alumni Relations of IIT Madras, faculty conveners, delegates, fellow scholars, and students of IIT Madras. A very warm good afternoon to one and all. It is my privilege to welcome you to the inaugural event of the Memory Studies Conference, Event, Memory, Remembering, 100 Years of Jallianwala Bagh. We are delighted to have with us today, as our chief guest, Mr. Kishore Padmanabhan, Vice President, Tata Consultancy Services. It is an honor to welcome you, sir, on behalf of IIT Madras and the organizers of the conference. I request Ms. Ranjini Srinivasan to felicitate Mr. Padmanabhan. We are honored to have with us today Professor Mahesh Panchagnula, Dean, International and Alumni Relations, and Professor of Applied Mechanics, IIT Madras. On behalf of the organizers of the conference, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Panchagnula. I request Ms. Ranjini to felicitate Professor Panchagnula and request him to release the conference booklet and the conference postcard. The postcard is a miniaturized version of the augmented reality mural, which can be accessed through the QR code provided. The artists behind the creation of this mural are Mr. Lingesh and Mr. Bhuvaneshwaran. A warm welcome to Dr. Merin Sumiraj and Dr. Avishek Parui of the Department of Humanities, IIT Madras. This conference is a result of their vision to initiate a research cluster and annual conferences in the field of memory studies. Event Memory Remembering, 100 Years of Jallianwala Bagh, is the first conference on memory studies to be held in India. The focus of this conference within the domain of memory studies is on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, a topical subject as we commemorate the centenary of this notable event in India's colonial history this year. This conference is organized in collaboration with Tata Consultancy Services. The pioneering work done by TCS's XR Labs in the field of virtual reality technology provides us with an innovative perspective which enables a critical re-engagement with memory studies and its relationship with visual culture. We are glad to have here with us today Dr. Ashok Maharaj of XR Labs, who played a key role in this collaboration. We welcome you, sir, to this event. We are happy to share with you that there was an overwhelming response to this conference, with over 150 abstracts being received from all over India and abroad. In the following couple of days, we will have the opportunity to listen to and engage with around 50 papers in the course of the conference. This conference brings together an eclectic group from various fields, such as media professionals, law students, professors, and research scholars in the humanities. On behalf of the conference organizers, I welcome all the delegates present here today, and we look forward to hearing about your research in the area of memory studies in the couple of days to follow. Today, being the inaugural day of the conference, the program schedule involves an address by the Dean, Professor Mahesh Panchagnula, an address by the Chief Guest, Mr. Kishore Padmanabhan, Vice President of Tata Consultancy Services, followed by a talk on the future of memory studies by the faculty conveners of the conference, Dr. Merin Sumiraj and Dr. Avishek Parui. I extend a warm welcome to everyone once again and hope that the conference will be an enriching experience for all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mridula. I now welcome the Dean of International and Alumni Relations, Professor Mahesh, to deliver the inaugural address. On behalf of the organizing committee, I extend my gratitude to Professor Mahesh for taking time out of his schedule to grace the event. Professor Mahesh has been traveling over the past few days. We are grateful for his presence here despite his busy schedule. I now request Professor Mahesh to address the gathering on this august occasion.
Good afternoon, and to those of you that are coming to IIT Madras from outside, welcome to IIT Madras. To those of us that are part of IIT Madras, welcome to this event. And Welcome to a rare and one of its kind of a conference. I get to attend a few of these inaugurals every so often, and a thematic event such as this is somewhat rare for us to find in a technology institution. And I'm very happy that that Merin and Avishek have taken the initiative to pull together stakeholders that wouldn't naturally hold a conversation among themselves. I think it's we all have learned to develop a small comfort zone around ourselves. In my field of mechanics, we call these comfort spots as local minima. So each of us have our own energy minima. We're quite happy to thrive and live our lives in those energy minima. And to hold a conversation with somebody else in some other minimum, one needs to cross an energy barrier of sorts. Conferences such as these enable somewhat lowered barriers for those conversations to happen. And I'm very happy that that effort has been made to lower those barriers so people can hold those conversations. Specifically, the conference is themed around Jallianwala Bagh, the massacre that occurred 100 years ago. It is an understatement to say it changed the course of our independence movement going forward. It spawned a narrative within the freedom fighting community that a more violent path needed to be exhorted. There was also a group that was attempting to, there was also a pacifist group that was attempting to find a calmer, more satyagraha driven route towards independence. And no day is more apt than today to discuss the thoughts that would have passed through those great people's minds than today being October 2nd, 150 years of Gandhiji's birth. Obviously, one can only write the history as it happened, not as it would have happened had the other path been chosen. But memory studies, as I understand it at least, allows us to reconstruct a version of history from people's memories in a way that you could chalk out multiple paths, because the people that were advocating the more violent path, also had, there's a collective memory of that group of people as well. So hopefully we will, during this conference, have a chance to discuss all of the options that were on the table, so to say, and the reasons behind the paths that were chosen as we know today. Finally, I was talking to Marin and Abhishek briefly about the audience that are likely to attend this event over the next few days. And it's very heartening to know that TCS, a hardcore technology company, has chosen to come together to create a visual space for people to relive, or as the theme says, remember Jallianwala Bagh. I think to kind of have this aspect of humanities meeting technology in scholarly events such as this is very important. I think these conversations are extremely rare, and we need to figure out a way to let them get into some form of a chain reaction. So you have an exponential growth in these conversations between technology professionals and humanities, the humanities community at large. As I was ruminating on the thought, on the theme itself, we use phrases, at least in normal English usage, we use certain phrases very loosely, which I know are very rigorously defined in the humanities community. Say, for example, I may say something like, our collective memory of Jallianwala Bagh is one that is written from a very India-centric frame of mind. but every word in that sentence probably has, a precise meaning and a way to be defined. I hope those of us that are lay people who are plain English users also learn of the more precise definitions and more precise meanings associated with these words, almost on the verge of being a scientifically defined phrase. I don't know if you could scientifically define such a thing as collective memory, but it would be like almost from a statistical point of view. The word collective memory almost has a statistical connotation, law of large numbers kicking in. You do some form of an averaging and then you take notes from the averaged person. That's kind of the mathematician's view of collective memory. I hope I wish to learn of the other definitions of collective memory and such very interesting phrases along the way. With that, I think I've exhausted my knowledge of this field, so I think I should stop before I expose more of my ignorance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Once again, we are deeply grateful to you for your presence here today. It is now my honor to introduce to you the chief guest for this evening, Mr. K. Padmanabhan. Mr. Padmanabhan is a Vice President at Tata Consultancy Services. He is a highly innovative leader, having been responsible for a number of innovations introduced in the quality and tools domain. Mr. Padmanabhan has been closely associated with TCS's first innovation lab, TRDDC, Pune. He is responsible for the development of insurance practices in the company and has led several critical business operations in TCS. As part of the Research and Innovation Division, he currently guides initiatives in digital hiring, operations risk, and retail strategy. Mr. Padmanabhan holds a master's degree in computer science from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Today, he is a senior member at TCS with over 40 years of experience. A number of TCS employees, young and old, look up to Mr. Padmanabhan as a mentor. Sir, I thank you for making the time to be here. Mr. Padmanabhan's presence at this event is testimony to the interdisciplinary nature of memory studies. The collaboration enabled by Mr. Padmanabhan's involvement has culminated in this dialogic platform, one where the interdisciplinary interface of humanities scholarship meets cutting-edge technology. The mural artwork installed in the lawns outside the Central Lecture Theatre is a symbol of how memory can be perceived through a combination of artwork and augmented reality. This artwork has been installed through an institute-level collaboration with XR Lab TCS. In this regard, we thank Mr. Ashok Maharaj, Mr. Venkat and team. We also like to thank Mr. Bhuvaneshwaran and Mr. Lingesh, artists who gave life to the mural. We hope that this conference will foster and give rise to more such collaborative possibilities. The committee has sent an email to all the delegates of the conference with a link to access the artwork. Delegates are requested to check for this email to view the mural. Following is the link displayed on screen to view the mural. Please note that a separate link for the visually challenged is also available. I now welcome Mr. Padmanabhan, Chief Guest, to address the audience.
Good afternoon. It's in my experience, it's extremely unusual to find a blend of humanities and technology in the same conference, and I congratulate the organizers in trying to put together a conference on especially the important topic of memory and how technology can help in visualizing and help our memory in very interesting ways. I think for people with gray hair like me, remembering the good old days is one of the characteristics of us young people. Everyone likes to think of the past, tries to bring up great memories and highlight those memories. In fact, when old friends get together, most of it, including the alumni of IIT, for example, most of the talks is about how great a time we had in the old days, what this professor said at that time, and what this student said at that time, and so on, and all the pranks we used to play. I mean, those memories are very much alive in the students. But one critical part, I think we all understand, is that memories are exceedingly personal. So the memories I have of my IIT days versus the memories my classmate has of those IIT days are very, very different. And those differences are also amplified by the associations we have. So I used to love physics and was not terribly fond of chemistry, and but psychology was a very interesting subject for me. So when I went into a physics class, I would have extremely pleasant memories, and any slips the professors made, I would ignore. But the slips the chemistry professor made, I would internally chuckle and try and get the thing. So it's the bias, the associations, the other things are really a critical part of the thing. And almost a lot of literature, a lot of other writings are about passing your memories in a real or symbolic form to others. These include, from the ancient days, the cave paintings that were there, which showed that I killed this beast, yay! And the hieroglyphics and the temple carvings that you see in the pyramids or in temples in India. The tremendous, almost all of literature is transferring your memories to other people, and in some form of another or another. Plays, radio and television is also a lot of things in the thing. Whenever we go on a holiday, a trip or something, in the old days we used to take a camera, now we take a mobile and keep capturing pictures of everything. These pictures are just memory enhancers so that we can remember all of this when we get back home and bore all our friends showing all the pictures to try and get. Of course, nowadays it's not just pictures, it is videos and other forms of things. One of the biggest things in corporate memories are also very, very strong. So a lot of research has said that the best way of understanding the corporate memory is understanding the stories that people tell of each other. I know that we in TCS tell a lot of stories about, very proudly, about our founder, Mr. F.C. Kohli. He would do a lot of things, and legends about him or Mr. Ramdurai or Mr. Chandrasekhar abound in TCS, and I think that really keeps alive the memories of their association. Of course, selfies are now the in thing for preserving memories, and we can try and look at that. If we start including a lot of technology into it, perhaps the example, any of you who have visited the Red Fort in Delhi, is strongly encouraged to see the Son et Lumiere or the Sound and Light show in Delhi. That shows a very immersive experience of being in the Mughal times and understanding what happened in those times and how the Red Fort itself lived through a lot of things. And preserving those memories are really important. Now, technology needs to find a way to make memories alive without the huge investment and specific time period, something like the Son et Lumiere does. And the internet world is a very strong, I being a technology being, I have to start talking about technology sooner or later. The internet world is has extremely transformed the world. Everyone knows about social networks and blogs and how that can be used to transmit one's stories, accounts, memories to others. And similarly, YouTube does a great job of capturing all sorts of things, whether it be the 10 wickets that Anil Kumble took in the Delhi Test match, or any of the other interesting items which you want to try and think about. And Wikipedia is, of course, a great storyteller. But the internet, because of its ability to be all-pervasive, whether it's here or in the wilds of the Rajasthan desert, you'll be able to try and get the internet in one form or another. And that enables a whole heap of potential technologies that can really make a difference. Augmented reality is a specific form of using the internet to grab associations of other types of other writings, other types of things together. One of the earlier forms of AR was what used to be called the Google glasses, where you essentially take those glasses, look at a building, any building anywhere, and it would search through its archives, tell you what building it is, and tell you a little bit of a history about it and try and get some information about it. This has been enhanced by what's called virtual reality, where you can virtually travel anywhere you like and be, through an avatar of yours, go anywhere. Or actually visualize yourself in any spot, including on the moon or on Mars if you like, and try and view things which you really cannot possibly do. This use of AR and VR, together called extended reality or XR, is something we in TCS are exploring a lot and trying to come up with extremely creative uses for it. We think we have a lot of very interesting applications, and we'll try and talk a little bit about that. But the XR overall can be used to animate any thing. So one of the things you can find on the internet is the Mona Lisa in the Louvre actually, opening her arms, putting a scarf on her shoulders and so on. And that animation is fascinating to see again. But equally, when watching the Mona Lisa, you can find out all about Leonardo da Vinci, who painted it, and some of his scientific inventions while you're watching that. You can get a lot of information about specific things. So from a more practical point of view, we in TCS use it to try and say, for a mechanic for complex machinery, to look at a part find out what the part number is, find out the details, and how to get a replacement for the part. We are able to do all of that using AR. It is possible to visualize something that is actually on text. And for those of us who are visually challenged, it is possible to verbalize a lot of the text. So a very important aspect of AR and VR is in accessibility. How perhaps we can get someone to translate something, words, into sign language using an avatar. And that sort of application is what really can excite and is a very exciting use of technology. Some of the possibilities, and I'm just sketching some very important possibilities. It is different people, when they go, they have different points of view. So if I go through a museum in the Chennai Museum, I might be interested in the Indian point of view. I may be interested in the British point of view of what they thought of each of those artifacts. I may be interested in the metal work and how the different jewelers over time were making things of the thing. So it's possible to try and get very different visualizations of the same thing. It is, of course, possible now to get a earphone set in most modern museums and wander around. Here I'm talking about using AR, augmented reality, to actually give different points of view of the same object. And that's extremely this thing. So if I'm interested in the historical viewpoint, I'll get a historical tour of that museum, and I can get other things. Personalization. So it is possible for me to say which view I want of this particular thing. And different people using the same AR can get different points of view of the same object. And this is what really makes us human, the fact that all of us are different and can get different points of view of the same thing. I talked about accessibility. A simple example of this, as you all know, down near Madurai, there has been a great find of Kuyedi, the archaeological excavation that has been done. So we might want to try and have different tours of Kuyedi using AR. One talking about life in those times, of how people were extremely hygienic, had sewers, had a whole heap of systems, and life in those times. We could try and talk about trade and how they traded with the Romans, with the Greeks, and so on, and look at the trade of that period. We can look at the weapons they used, or if we want to understand how the ladies thought, what sort of jewelry they used and how the jewelry compares with modern jewelry. See, these, so it's not only looking at what the jewelry is, what is the corresponding modern equivalent of that necklace, and how that the comparison, the method of manufacture, all of those things can be done by means of artificial reality. I am just very, very impressed that the organizers have had a topic of memory studies and made it a multidisciplinary approach to study memory and to understand and to how to collaborate with memory. They have history, literature, psychology, technology, all sorts of very, very distinct disciplines coming together to help us understand and see how memory shapes our view of life. I've got to do a commercial, as I'm from TCS. We collaborate a lot with IIT in all sorts of different things. So far, it has been on technology, by looking at traffic, by looking at retail, and just now on XR with the humanities. We also do a lot of collaboration research with a number of other IITs and other academic institutions. In summary, I just want to say that memory is a very important and critical aspect of study, and especially for me, because I think I'm beginning to lose my memory and not remember all the things I would like to do. So I hope the conference comes up with very interesting options for me to try and recall things. Thank you very much, and I thank the organizers for the opportunity for talking to all of you. Bye.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful and valuable words. Your lecture has opened new avenues of thinking and learning for all of us present here. I now request the faculty conveners, Dr. Avishek Parui and Dr. Merin Sumiraj, to deliver the inaugural lecture titled The Future of Memory Studies. I first welcome Dr. Merin to the podium.
Thanks, Ranjani. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be here. Good to see you all. Thank you for making it. So what we would like to do in this brief time is to highlight the perspectives, different perspectives within which this conference and these larger initiatives and collaborations are placed. Let me thank Professor Mahesh for reminding us and also for highlighting the ways in which IIT Madras has been enabling us to move out of the comfort zones and also enable new conversations across disciplines. So part of the objective of our talk is also highlight the nature of these dialogic initiatives. I also thank Professor Mr. Padmanabhan for underscoring these various kinds of initiatives, which we also hope to be able to formalize in these next couple of days through various interactions and various collaborative initiatives. So this conference titled Event Memory and Remembering 100 Years of Jallianwala Bagh. Here we encourage to look at memory and remembering as personal as well as political acts. And we also look at how these two acts about remembering, memory, and the personal and the political nature of it, how they get legitimized through various discursive narratives. So in this process, and thanks to all of you who have sent wonderful abstracts to us, we have managed to attract great scholarship that will critically engage with event narratives, and also they examine the process of memory formation that will critically engage with this event in particular, and also about the many other peripheral and dialogic events which are related to Jallianwala Bagh. So part of the objective of this conference is also to aim to engage with the event of Jallianwala Bagh through the frame of memory studies research, whereby remembering and forgetting emerges personal as well as political activities which are experientially and discursively disseminated and consumed. So those of us who have taken a look at the mural, the AR activated mural, you also have begun to realize how experientially it's possible to engage with something which is removed to us in terms of time and in terms of distance. So this conference is an attempt to inquire into the ways in which this event, in particular Jallianwala Bagh, how this has been documented and remembered in the last 100 years. And this happened on 13th April 1919. 100 years have passed since then. And we also know that this has been documented in various ways, in pictures, in documentaries, in films, and in different kinds of archival spaces. And these spaces have been both public as well as personal. This conference is also a space where we try to bring together these various aspects. So we propose to use Jallianwala Bagh, this year being the centenary year, as a prefatory event to help enter various discourses. And these discourses are quite complex, they're overlapping in nature, and we have different kinds of narratives coming in from nationalism, historiography, memory, and event. And we also seek to move beyond the narrativization of this event per se, which also means that this is an annual series. This conference is an annual series on memory studies that we propose to have, and we will be looking at various events and various narratives in the next coming years. So this is only an entry point. Jallianwala Bagh, this year being the centenary year, is only an entry point for us to engage with this kind of scholarship and also with the dialogic nature of the interactions that we propose to have. So we look at this conference and the interactions in the next 2 days as a pioneering platform to explore newer intersections in memory studies, digital humanities, and augmented reality, as it has already been pointed out in various ways that this is the first of its kind, and this initiative is something we hope to be able to formalize in different ways as well. So we hope to aim to arrive at some interesting ideas about the future of memory studies as a discipline. In that context, we would also like to reiterate that there are these long-term plans that we have in mind as collaborations, and also in terms of establishing a center for memory studies which would bring together different disciplines and different narratives from both the public as well as the personal domains. So in keeping up with the current cognitive studies preference for examining memory as a process of active recreation rather than passive recollection, which is why we have titled this as Remembering. So we attempt to reread as well as virtually recreate the event of Jallianwala Bagh. So this also makes history accessible in more experiential terms, as we have seen in one case in this AR-activated mural. So the texts and narratives, including literature, movies, archival material, music, photographs, monuments, etc., about such events, they all can serve as potential sites of inquiry in alignment with AR tools. So using technology as an emotional as well as an evocative medium, alongside many other narratives as we spoke about, so there are many interdisciplinary possibilities that would begin to open up, and those are some of the things that we would also hopefully explore in the next couple of days. So there are newer avenues for research, for narratives, for archiving, for, more importantly, for remembering various kinds of events within the broad scope of the discipline of memory studies. And so among other things, at this conference we seek to showcase how a violent event from the past, the Jallianwala Massacre, which happened in 1919 with overt political and imperial undertones, how such an event could be used in the contemporary as a starting point in locating these interstices of literature, memory, empathy, and also augmented reality. So in that sense, we believe that this conference is the first of its kind in India, where we have an active academia, artwork, and industry collaboration in the field of memory studies. And this event also follows from the first session that we did at in the Humanities and Social Sciences Department at IIT Madras on extended reality and empathy. This was in collaboration with the XR Lab of TCS Chennai, headed by Dr. Ashok Maharaj. So this event was on 26th March 2019. This was widely reported across the media, and it was very well attended within our campus as well. So we explored various possibilities of carrying forward such interdisciplinary initiatives, particularly with an interface between academics and technology. So this was structured in the form of a workshop given by Dr. Ashok Maharaj from XR Lab TCS, and also by Jay Grant from KLM Dutch Airlines. So this interface and the dialogic nature of such initiatives were very well received, and we hope that in the next couple of days, and also through the many initiatives that will be carried forward, we will be able to formalize these different relationships that are being forged over here. So in close correspondence with the academic presentations from across India as well as from abroad, we have as exhibits mural artwork stylized by state-of-the-art augmented reality animation from the XR Lab of TCS Chennai. We encourage you and remind you again to take a look at the mural, which is placed in the lawns in front of CLT, and it's a miniature version of that that you also have in the form of a postcard along with a QR code. So in this conference, we thus hope to bring together academics, artists, and scientists in a direct dialogue depicting contemporary readings and also the retellings of a historic event of national importance, in this case, the event of Jallianwala Bagh. The exhibits, with their postmodern, experiential, and immersive qualities, represent a complex contemporary take on the event Jallianwala Bagh, and in this process, those underline the interdisciplinary interface of humanities scholarship and cutting-edge technology. We think it is imperative for the future of memory studies as a discipline itself. Thank you for your time, and we hope to be able to interact with you along these lines in the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I now welcome our second faculty convener, Dr. Parui, to the podium.
Thank you very much, Ranjini. Thank you, Professor Mahesh, Dean IIR, for gracing this occasion with your time. Thank you very much, Mr. Padmanabhan, for that really fascinating lecture, and that got me thinking along so many lines that I'll try to touch upon a little bit in this very short address that I will deliver now. So I'll just begin, because I'm a literature person and I can just do one thing. So I'll just begin with a quotation from a very famous book that most of you will have read. And this is a queen in Lewis Carroll's To the Looking Glass, where she says, "It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards." And I picked this line from a mathematician writing fantasy literature as our starting point in his very short address on the future of memory studies. For memory, as cognitive neuroscientists tell us today, it's not a passive recall, as Merin pointed out. It's not a passive recall of the past, but instead an active and imaginative reconstruction of the same. And imagination as a temporal function is more often than not forward-looking. So mostly we imagine what's about to happen. That's mostly how we locate imagination in terms of time. So it's a forward-looking faculty. And now we know through scientific evidence that imagination plays a key role in how we remember. So already we have some kind of a temporal mess. So what we have here is a complex combination of an engagement with the past with a future-gazing faculty of imagination. So memory, thus, is already always embedded with a future-gazing frame that situates the self who remembers. Now this connects memory with another key aspect of the human mind, which is storytelling, and Mr. Padmanabhan touched upon that brilliantly through a series of historical markers, how memory is always some kind of a storytelling. And I believe an excellent definition of memory would emerge if we were to examine it as an activity where the mind tells stories to the self. That's my working definition of memory, where the mind tells stories to the self all the time. Now this obviously stems and triggers one into some profound philosophical questions, to which I'll not go because I know you have evening plans, and I'll let you go. Some of you have traveled a lot, and not go into those questions, but suffice it to say that memory as an act of recreation has a complex cognitive relation with imagination and storytelling, as it has with, interestingly, forgetting. And this is another very key thing. Forgetting, as psychologists tell us today, is not the ontological opposite of memory, but rather a cognitive component of it. In other words, if you cannot forget, your ability to remember gets hampered. And we have ample evidence from medical case histories, as well as fiction. Some of you would have known this very famous and strange short story by Borges, Funes de Memorioso, where the disease of someone is that they cannot forget. And that actually becomes a pathological condition. So in other words, we know today, through empirical evidence, that forgetting is a cognitive component of remembering. It's not the ontological opposite, as we would have imagined. So in other words, if you cannot forget, your normal memory function begins to get affected, often adversely, and we have ample evidence scientifically as well as otherwise to corroborate the same. Now, since I've now used the word, forgetting, I may as well move on to the next thing that I want to touch upon a little bit, which is fiction. So why we look at fiction at all? In a memory studies conference, why situate fiction? Why place so much importance in fiction? What is it about fiction that makes it so interesting, dangerous, subversive, etc.? Right? So fiction, of course, is complex because it's not a lie. Fiction is never a lie. Nor is fiction fantasy. But it's somewhat situated between what really happened and what could have happened and what should have happened. And it's this very complex combination of different cognitive perspectives which makes fiction such a fertile ground for memory studies. Right? It is a combination of what really took place. For instance, historical fiction is what really happened, combined very asymmetrically with what could have happened, and sometimes, more interestingly, with what should have happened. And all these different combinations come together to make fiction a very subversive, interesting, cognitive machine, as it were. So this gives fiction a unique, almost a vantage point, a vantage perspective to comment on the past, while also negotiating with the future. And I just go back to the beginning of this talk, when we say that memory is a combination of the past as well as imagination. So fiction is the machine we're looking at. If we have to look at memory, fiction is perhaps the best entry point into understanding how the human mind remembers. So it gives a unique perspective to comment on the past, while also negotiating with the future, as it can combine complex cognitive perspectives. And I was fascinated by Mr. Padmanabhan's discussion of points of view, because I think that's a key thing about fiction, points of view. We have like very sophisticated arguments, Henry James, etc., talking about points of view. But more recently, we have a neuroscientist, a famous neuroscientist, V.S. Ramachandran, who actually goes on to say that the need to reconcile the first and third person accounts of the universe is perhaps the single most important challenge for science. In other words, to map the first person point of view with a third person point of view. How do you do it? That's perhaps, as V.S. Ramachandran says, he's famous for his work on phantom limbs, etc. Some of you may have read his work. But he says that is perhaps the biggest challenge for psychology. How do you reconcile or map the first person point of view with a third person point of view? And then you say, hang on, there's something which does it already. Fiction, right? Novel, read a novel. Thus we find it happening all the time. The first person point of view getting mixed up with a third person point of view, etc. Right? So I sort of agree with what the novelist and literary critic David Lodge says, that fiction perhaps comes closest in offering that cognitive combination, that like this gold standard of cognitive combination, whereby the embedded and the enacted quality of memory and remembering play out. It is embedded as well as enacted. It's always playing out as well as getting in. So in other words, we get inside the human brain in terms of how the human brain thinks. So for those of you interested, for instance, in modernism, that the entire obsession with stream of consciousness is basically looking into the human mind. But also fiction gives us plot, character, which progresses in one dimension. So this constant combination of the inward-looking mind and the outward-looking mind is what fiction does fantastically. So that there we have this memory machine, fiction, and that is a machine we need to keep going back to in terms of understanding how the human mind remembers. And we have this new genre called the neuronovel, which has come up in a big thing in the last 10 years. So, for instance, we have this brilliant novel by Ian McEwan, Saturday, which has a neuroscientist trying to understand how the human brain responds to poetry. How do we become soft while listening to a poem? So how does poetry efface violence? So how can a violent mind be changing if we sort of make it exposed to a lyric, for instance? What is it about the lyric, that combination of language, which it does to the human brain and mind? So we have this new genre coming up in a big way, the neuronovel. Now, this conference, which uses this memory studies theoretical frame to remember and re-examine a major event in our national history. I mean, Jallianwala Bagh massacre was a massive event in colonial history, as well as in terms of how the entire national narrative got formed subsequent to it. So this conference treats fiction seriously and very, very sophisticatedly, as we can see from the abstracts we received, some really, really interesting works coming up, as a unique representational as well as a very interesting cognitive category. So we look at fiction not just as a representational category, but also as a cognitive category. So in this, I think this combination we are doing, this collaboration we're doing with TCAs is fascinating, because what we're getting to technology is this entire idea of embedded reality and how that gets played out to different virtual mediums, experientiality, and how do you make that dialogic with, let's say, a poem or a novel, the entire affective experience that we get from reading a novel, right? How can we compare that affective experience from, say, looking at a mural animated through AR technology? How do you compare the two affective frames, as it were? And I think memory studies will really benefit, as Merin pointed out excellently, through this particular collaboration. And like she said, I mean, this is the first of a series of conferences we're thinking of hosting in this institute. And the ultimate aim, as I was talking to some people, some of you who've come early, is to really establish a center for memory studies, where we look at how we can bring in all these different kinds of disciplines, psychology, medicine, law, literature, machine studies, and see what we can do in terms of how we look at memory as it keeps changing all the time. Because as Mr. Padmanabhan pointed out, the machines of memory are changing. And with the machines of memory, how we remember is also changing, right? So when the symbols change, there's some neural change happening in the brain as well, right? Because, we always remember through certain material markers. And the material markers could be letters in one century, it could be SMS in some other century, it could be something else in some other century, right? So our neural engagement with material markers is exactly where we should look at memory studies. And therein we have this very interesting combination of abstraction, which is novel, literature, fantasy, and materiality, which is technology. That's why we really need to collaborate as we are doing through this particular event. So to conclude, I would like to state and reiterate what Merin essentially said, that we conceive this idea of this conference in terms of how a major event like Jallianwala Bagh can be remembered and, more importantly, represented. Right? That's a key thing, representation. From an interdisciplinary interface, and technology, as it appears in this conference, is dialogic with fiction and historiographic reading. So they supplement each other. So like you said, when we go to CLT and take a look at the mural through that prism and get affected by it in terms of how the experience transports us, what we would like to do is compare how the transportation is akin to, let's say, reading a novel or reading a poem, right? How do you compare the two affective frames? How do you establish a dialogue between these two affective frames? So that's the key, I think, in terms of the future of memory studies. So we believe this is perhaps the most fruitful future for memory studies as a discipline, to examine technology, art, fiction, history, all as narratives, as acts of storytelling, right? And this goes back to the original definition of memory that I sort of proposed, to see memory as a story that a human brain tells to itself all the time, right? So how do we look at that storytelling as a spectacular category through art, technology, literature, fantasy, etc.? So, as acts of storytelling, whose narrativity is sometimes nested, sometimes hyperlinked, sometimes self-reflective. And how all that is complexly connected to our sense of the self as it consumes and questions cultural as well as existential experiences through messy, mutable moments. And we in literature know we celebrate messiness, don't we? Right, so we always look for messiness, and that's why our business is to make things messy with language, with theory, etc. So messiness is very, very welcome. Now, so the last words I give to a great artist in literature, Samuel Beckett. So those of you interested in literature and machine studies, this is a figure that all go back to. Memory studies, this is the figure we all go back to. He's very famous for writing this one play written for Godot, but there are endless dramas and theater that he's written. And I think he is someone who needs to be really dug up in a very, very big way in terms of looking at memory studies as the way we want to situate it today. And this is what he said. The real destination of art, the real aim of the artist, is to find a form that accommodates the mess. And that is the task of the artist now. And we believe, this is probably a bit of a hubris on our part, but we just go with it, that memory studies as a discipline may just be that coveted art, right, which can accommodate an articulate messiness, right? It's maybe that design, that discipline, if we look at it from that perspective, where we really marry humanities with technology, maybe then we achieve that coveted art that Beckett talks about, where messiness can be welcomed, accommodated, and articulated. So, through which we accommodate and articulate what we remember, that is memory, but more importantly, how we remember. And that is the more interesting bit, how memory happens, right? How do you look at memory taking place? So thank you very much for your attention, and we really look forward to engaging with you in the times to come. And as I mentioned, as Merin mentioned, and as Ranjini mentioned, we received an overwhelming response to this conference. And if this is anything to go by, I think we've got a great, great future for memory studies in the times to come. Thank you. We'll see you at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Right.